One of the bigger questions I've seen being asked in the wake of House of the Dragon Season 1 centers around the concept of what happens if Rhaenyra Targaryen takes the throne uncontested. That in the event of Viserys' death, there was no push from Alicent, Otto, and ultimately Aegon to state their own claim to the Iron Throne. Now this has actually turned out to be a harder question to answer than it first seems on the surface, mainly due to the butterfly effect of a seemingly peaceful passing of power. So much changes in that situation, it's hard to really be able to build a clear idea, as the events that no longer happen as a result in turn create a knock-on effect of their own, meaning that this single change is so seismic it makes predicting what could happen challenging, to say the least. So I'm going to narrow the question down slightly to what would happen to Aegon and the rest of the Greens in this scenario, and how ultimately Rhaenyra becoming Westeros' first ruling queen could very likely lead to some kind of civil war down the road, regardless, even after a few generations had passed, as just because Aegon never pressed his own claim does not mean a descendant of his would not years later. All you have to do is look at the numerous Blackfyre rebellions to see how events could play out. So the first aspect of this I wanted to look at is what actually happens to Aegon and the rest of the Greens in this scenario. I've made a video on this before, and it may be a controversial viewpoint to some, but House of the Dragon, Otto claims to Alicent that Rhaenyra coming to the throne would mean death for Alicent's children, while a bold claim, even if you do support Rhaenyra over Aegon, Otto's claim is fundamentally true. Even if Rhaenyra personally didn't want to kill her half-siblings, the risk they pose to her claim, simply by existing, creates a situation where they would perpetually be a threat, even unwillingly and unknowingly. If not Rhaenyra, someone would likely take action, be that Daemon, or perhaps another member of the Black Council, or a lord trying to buy Rhaenyra's favour. The issue Rhaenyra faces when it comes to Aegon is the moment a disgruntled lord, or potentially a foreign power, look to strike at Rhaenyra. The likes of Aegon, Aemond, Daeron, and their descendants become an easy rallying point. So, if we set aside this issue momentarily, and say that there's never actually going to be an issue, remove the concept of them being a threat just by being alive, then what happens to Aegon? I see there being 2 or 3 likely outcomes here. One of them is having Aegon stay at Oldtown, which seems like a good fit given his close connection to the House Hightower part of his heritage. It seems like a natural home for the Green branch of the family if they weren't to be in King's Landing. I could even see a situation where Aegon's children are either married into Rhaenyra's branch of the family, further reducing the risk of Aegon's line becoming a rallying point in future generations. I could also see them marrying some of Aegon and perhaps his siblings' children into House Hightower. The issue with this idea is with Aegon so far away from court, if there were any scheming going on, it would be much harder to keep an eye on the situation. Plus, you're then creating a very powerful Hightower base in the Reach. With half a House Targaryen, the power of House Hightower and Oldtown, plus dragons, Aegon staying at Oldtown is a risky move. Thus I think he'd stay somewhere closer to home in King's Landing. And I feel even if Aegon publicly renounced his claim, there would perhaps always be a layer of mistrust. In King's Landing, there would always be eyes on him, just in case. But I think there could be another approach to this. I think it's possible that Rhaenyra would allow Aegon to create almost a cadet branch of House Targaryen, giving him land, titles, and the right to raise a castle. I suspect in this scenario, it would be somewhere in the Crown Lands, similar to the original plan for Daemon Blackfyre before he rebelled, starting the Blackfyre rebellions, having Alicent's branch of the family have a separate identity to itself, but perhaps distance them from their claim to the throne further. But as Daemon Blackfyre proves, this method too holds its risks, and ultimately would not prevent a lord or foreign power seeing Aegon and his descendants as a tool to disrupt the balance of power in Westeros. The only way I can see to stop the threat Aegon is to Rhaenyra, simply by existing, is marrying their children together. Theoretically, marrying Jacaerys to Jaehaera to merge the branches of the family makes the most sense, but in practice there are a few hurdles. While the concept of Aegon versus Rhaenyra's claim is clearly the issue for the present, you have to look at the bigger picture as well. Even if Aegon is happy for Rhaenyra to take the throne peacefully, and there is no push from other members of the family to place Aegon there is still only solving the short-term issue. Who knows what could happen a few generations later? I see a situation that the Blackfyre rebellions playing out over and over this time with dragons, and I think some kind of Dance of the Dragons-like event would be inevitable in an instance where Rhaenyra takes the throne uncontested, with the only possible way I see of stopping it being the merging of the rival branches via Jace and Jaehaera, which in itself is problematic given the 9-year age gap between the two in the books. While it's not that big of a deal in the book, it's not particularly ideal. While a betrothal could happen, the year's wait till Jaehaera was reasonably old enough to consummate the marriage poses a huge risk of foul play from unknown forces, which is exactly what happened in the instance of Jaehaera marrying Aegon III. If you're exclusively talking about House of the Dragon and not the books, then the situation works even less. The whole reason the seemingly sensible idea of marrying Rhaenyra to Aegon never goes anywhere is the sheer age gap involved. But ultimately, there is a reason the end of the Dance of the Dragons results in the marriage of Aegon III and Jaehaera. It's the only logical thing to do that can bring both sides of the war together, merging the lines of the claimants. But even that ends in tragedy at the death of Jaehaera. But by that time, with Jaehaera's death, anyone with a rival claim is dead, and thus the issue is in itself void. This is why the question of what happens to Aegon and the Greens is so hard to answer, as it stacks butterfly effect upon butterfly effect. But that's ultimately because the Dance of the Dragons is such a key defining point in the history of Westeros. Much like in the real world, with William the Conqueror invading England in 1066, or Alfred the Great's dream of a united England. Without them, history as we know it takes an utterly different path, completely unrecognisable to us. Thus all we can do is speculate. Maybe Aegon moves to Oldtown or stays in King's Landing. Maybe he and Rhaenyra's children marry. Maybe not. But what I feel I can comfortably say for sure is this. Even if Aegon himself never tried to claim the throne and Rhaenyra became queen, it's inevitable there would be some kind of Dance of the Dragons-like civil war at some point, as no matter how hard you try and cut it, without merging the rival claims by the marriage of their descendants, or wiping out Alicent's branch of House Targaryen, there would always be a banner for enemies of the crown to rally around.